Is Dragon Ball Sparking Zero a serious competitive fighting game? What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the channel. I'm LotusAsakura, the one who never knows best. And in today's video, I want to open up a discussion and basically give my opinion, my thoughts, my answer to the question posed at the start of this video. And I might have already given my answer based on however I titled this, but basically, is Dragon Ball Sparking Zero a competitive fighting game? If you just want my honest answer straight from the jump, I'm going to say no. And we're going to discuss why I feel that way in this video, and I'm going to give, my reasoning, my logic behind it. And I would love to hear how you guys feel about this and the points that I'm making in this video in the comment section down below, because this is a question that I have been getting asked a lot leading up to the release of Sparking Zero, and even more so now that the game is officially out. I've been streaming every single day since the game is released, and I get this question multiple times a day. Is the game competitive, and could I see this game at EVO, or do I think this game should be at EVO? And again, my answer is no, I don't think it will be at EVO, nor do I think it should be. And frankly, I think it would be more harmful to the scene and to the game for it to be on that kind of stage than helpful. In my opinion, I just don't think this is that type of game, and we're going to talk about why today. Before we get into this discussion, we have to define two things. What is a fighting game, and what does it mean to be competitive? If you were to ask a bunch of people about whether or not Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is even a fighting game, a lot of people will probably say yes, but a lot of people will probably say no. And why is that? It's because of the nuance surrounding some of these words that we're using and some of these terms and phrases, especially as it pertains to the FGC or the fighting game community. When we say the term fighting game, most people are going to think of Tekken, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, maybe some Guilty Gear, BlazBlue, games of that nature. However, to others, it's a lot more simple. Isn't a fighting game just a game in which you fight in? And I would say, by definition, literal, like very, very literal definition, yes, if you fight in the game, it is a fighting game. But I think in this context, it's not necessarily that simple. But with that being said, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is what we would call an arena fighter, which is a subgenre of fighting games. So this would include games of, like the Naruto Storm games, the Xenoverse series, the older Budokai and Tenkaichi games, Sparking Zero. These are arena fighters. This subgenre is not normally included in the conversation when we're talking about competitive fighting games that you see at EVO. But oftentimes, a lot of these games do show up offline at these events, but as side events. They're normally not super mainstream, big, popular, all eyes on me main stage games that you see. Typically, maybe the combat isn't as deep, the mechanics aren't as fleshed out, or the game isn't as well balanced as some of the other games. I'm generalizing a little bit here. Obviously, there could be exceptions here or there, but I'm just trying to help you understand where I'm coming from and what I mean, and again, the nuance and context behind some of these words and phrases. Also, I would offer this as an analogy. Think of it like this, right? Let's say if I use the word anime. When I say anime, there's probably an exact type of medium that comes to mind. You think of series like Demon Slayer, Dragon Ball, Naruto, One Piece, Jujutsu Kaisen, Dandadan, My Hero Academia, right? Those are the types of series that immediately come to mind. But if I ask you whether or not SpongeBob or The Amazing World of Gumball is an anime, you might look at me kind of crazy, right? But in Japan, anime is just short for animation. So it's not really incorrect to call what we would normally call cartoons anime, because that's how they would refer to it. So Dragon Ball is an anime, SpongeBob's an anime, but here in the States, we don't call SpongeBob an anime. When we say anime, we're referring to a specific medium, a specific style. So likewise, in the FGC, when we're talking about fighting games, we're not necessarily including every subgenre of the overall arcing genre. It's more so more of a niche. Core 8 Gaming actually made a video discussing the different types of genres and subgenres of fighting games. It doesn't really talk a whole lot about that nuance and go into depth about it the way that I wish that it did, but I do still think it's a video that's worthwhile watching. And if I remember, I'll try to include it in the description down below. But yeah, with that out of the way, what makes a game competitive? So first and foremost, let's look at the literal definition of the word competitive, because I think that is important to first establish. So if we jump over here, we can see that by definition, competitive means relating to or characterized by competition, having or displaying a strong desire to be more successful than others. So this is the dictionary definition of the word, but in the FGC, we're not necessarily using the dictionary definition of the word because, again, nuance is an important factor here. Because if you think about it, any game at all where there is online multiplayer and you're pitting one or more players against one another, that is competitive. That is competition. You are literally competing against one another. But obviously that's not what we mean by something being competitive. Even something as far as like having a ranked mode in your game doesn't necessarily mean that the game is competitive, because while you are competing against each other, there is more context to it than that. When someone asks me whether or not a game is competitive, I ask myself, is this a consistent, functional, fair, balanced game that creates an equal playing field that caters to multiple players and play styles that will allow them to compete against one another and showcase a difference in skill and ability to wield the characters and mechanics in the game and showcase a gap in that skill? In my opinion, most of these arena fighters do not have the level of consistency, quality, or depth that puts it on par with some of those other games, the likes of Tekken 8 or Street Fighter 6, or just, even just those franchises in general. Now, with that being said, I don't mean to like diminish anime games necessarily and say that like, oh, they can never ever be competitive, or if it's an arena fighter, it's automatically disqualified. I do think that as they currently are, being in that field does make it immediately lose some merit, because there is an inherent difference. And even those games in that echelon do have their fair share of jank, balance issues, or whatever, but they cater toward the idea of, we want this game to be fair and balanced, and constantly develop these games with that in mind and make those adjustments, so on and so forth. Whereas I don't believe this game is going to do that really necessarily. We have a hint of that so far, but you know what I mean? It's got a lot to prove. The developer's intention with the game and the overall balance of the roster as it pertains to a fighting game plays a large factor to me in whether or not the game could ever be considered competitive. And when you look at modern fighting games like a Tekken 8 or Street Fighter 6 or Mortal Kombat 1, these games are being designed and developed with the idea of tournament play, world tours, esports in mind. They're taking into account this game being played. They're taking into account the idea of this game being played offline in a competitive setting, players competing against one another for money, them being part of a world tour, accumulating these points, spectators, people in the audience watching people play this game at the highest level. While that may not have always been the case for these games, and they all had to start somewhere, that is where we are at in the modern era. Dragon Ball Sparking Zero was not designed to be at EVO. It was not designed to be at tournaments. Not to say that you can't run your own events and have some fun and have its own scene, but it's not trying to be in that realm or in that lane or in that echelon. It's trying to be something else. And I think it's only players that are trying to push it to be alongside, you know, the traditional fighters like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, Tekken, Guilty Gear, whatever. The developers themselves said that this game would not be balanced. They designed this roster to be balanced in a way that reflects their power in the series, which is why you have a character like Master Ultra Instinct Goku or a character like Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, who are two of the most powerful characters in the game and obviously the most popular. And you feel that difference in character power if you're playing Krillin or like a Namek Saga character or a Saiyan Saga character. Like if you're playing Raditz, you're gonna have a really hard time fighting Jiren or Beerus or Z Broly. You know what I mean? It's gonna be abundantly clear. And yes, character power varies in all games. Tier lists are a thing in every game, but I feel like the character power in a game like Sparking Zero is drastically different from the top tier to the bottom tier compared to, again, the more traditional fighters. In my opinion, and when it comes to my expectations, Sparking Zero is not a game that's going to get regular balance updates with the idea of fairness and equality, I guess, in mind. They aren't going to be making a ton of changes to the game with the idea of making it more fair for competition, because that's just not what they had in mind when designing this game. Now, with that being said, I feel like I'm playing both sides a tiny little bit, even though I'm obviously leaning towards one side more than the other, because I have talked about things I want to see get changed in the game. I obviously play fighting games, but I also play arena fighters. I've been playing, bro, if I go back there, I mean, I talked about it before. I have Budokai 1, 2, and 3, Tenkaichi 1, 2, and 3, Ultimate Ninja 1 through 4, every single Storm game. I've played them all. Xenoverse 1 and 2, Burst Limit 1 and 2, Raging Blast. All them games is backed on that shelf. I ain't gonna go grab them all right now, but matter of fact, yes, I will. Yes, I will. This isn't even all of them. These are just the ones I can just go grab off the shelf over there real quick. There's a few more over there. There's a few more over there, but like, I've been outside for a very long time, and obviously I'm mostly known for fighting games, so I don't think I have to show you every fighting game I own, because we can go from Tekken 1 all the way up to Tekken 8, and plenty of Street Fighter games, MK, you know what I'm saying? So like, I have experience in both genres. And I feel like that makes me qualified enough to say that there's a pretty big difference between these games and the games that I normally play, I guess, on the channel, like even a Dragon Ball Fighters or a Tekken 8 or Tekken 7 or Guilty Gear Strive, Mortal Kombat 1, Street Fighter 6, Grand Blue Fantasy vs. Rising. Those games are designed very differently with very different intentions. These games, while they do have some level of skill it requires to play them at a higher level, and there can be a skill gap, are designed to be more fun and more casual compared to the other games that are designed to have a much higher ceiling and a better demonstration of what it means to be a top player in that game. at least in my opinion. I personally don't think a game like Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is quite refined enough mechanically, or honestly even functional enough to be taken as seriously as some of those more traditional fighting games. Even if we take balance out of the equation, there's just too many bugs, glitches, inconsistencies that just don't make it a reliable enough game to be on that tier. But I also think that that's perfectly fine. The game doesn't have to be Tekken. It doesn't have to be Street Fighter. It can just be its own thing. It doesn't have to get tossed into a room where it doesn't belong. I think if we allow the game to be itself, it's a lot more fun and more enjoyable that way. Let's talk about TNS. There is a weekly tournament that is held on twitch.tv/Tampa Never Sleeps, aka TNS, where they host a plethora of different games. And most recently, they hosted Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. And to be honest, the event was kind of a mess. Now, I say this with nothing but the utmost respect for TNS and Tampa Never Sleeps. A little bit of how it ran might be a little bit their fault, but a lot of it is the game's fault as well, because again, the game is just not really meant to be played that way. And yeah, it was rather funny. Okay, there was a lot of cheese, a lot of brokenness. That the event ran on for a very, very long time, much longer than those events normally run. TNS is an event that typically, let's say for Tekken 8, will run for 4 to 5 hours. This event ran for over 7 hours, and that's with them even kind of skipping over some matches and not showing as much as they normally would in the sake or for the sake of the event not running until 6 a.m. I am not exaggerating when I say this, okay? I watched the entire tournament from start to finish on my own stream. There was a set that took 40 minutes for 2 matches to be played. I believe it was Losers Finals. Losers Final went on for 40 minutes and a total of 2 games got played. There were so many matches that went down the timer because of stall mechanics and strategies like Android 19 and 20 on the same team, Yajirobe, Cell, and also like, again, functional errors within the game itself and having to restart and things like that. But even let's just say like bugs, glitches, game crashing aside, there were other sets and other matches that were 2-0 and it took 20 to 30 minutes, like 30 minutes plus to complete for a 2-0 set. That's ridiculous. And then you get to the point where you have to create a rule set outside of the game so that you can have some sort of structure and a reasonable format to run this at some sort of event. And to me, when you have to go outside the game and create an extensive rule set in order to run the game in a tournament setting, I think that itself is evidence that the game is lacking in some sort of competitive integrity and wasn't designed to be in that type of environment. Compared to some other games where it's just like, you turn the game on, go to versus mode, hey, whoever wins 2 games first, you win, you advance on to the next round. Now, of course, like every tournament has its own sort of rule set, but I feel like with a game like Sparking Zero, you got to do stuff like it has to be this timer, this game mode. Are we banning these characters? You have to have character bans, stage bans. Like it goes a lot deeper. And you know, I've seen people bring up games like Smash, and really, well, I shouldn't even say games. It's really just been Smash. People like to bring up Smash Bros. The vast majority of people don't consider Smash part of the FGC, and it was at EVO for a while and it's not anymore. And it's just typically more looked at as its own thing that's adjacent to the fighting game community, but not really part of it. I don't really think it serves as a good example. And honestly, even if you do want to consider it a fighting game and consider it competitive, whatever, I would still say that it's such an extreme example and that it's an outlier, it's an anomaly. There aren't too many others that are like it. And the only other things that are comparable to it are games that have just copied its exact formula that are just other platform fighters that are just trying to be Smash. That's my stance on that. You may disagree, but I don't really think Smash serves as a good example. And frankly, because there's normally such a distinction between the FGC and Smash, I feel like if you have to use that as an example or you're comparing it to that, you're kind of already losing the argument. And yeah, I mentioned it earlier before, like games like Street Fighter and Tekken, they didn't start off being these super ultra competitive, well-balanced fighting games. You know what I mean? They didn't start off being esports, even if that is where they ended up. That's not how it all began. They were a lot more buggy or broken or imbalanced and not refined. And to that, I would say, well, yeah, that was 20, 30 years ago and they have evolved. And I would say that arena fighters are still in that evolving phase where they haven't quite met that criteria or like gotten past that threshold that I feel holds them back. I don't think that necessarily means that inherently the arena fighter genre is like doomed to always be at a certain level and that it has a hard ceiling on it, but I do think that it hasn't quite pushed past that limit just yet. There are maybe some games out there that have gotten close, but none of the ones I've played or I'm familiar with do that. I know people like to bring up like Clash of Ninja or like the Gundam games or whatever, but even those again are like very different genres of fighting games. And like the Gundam stuff I wouldn't even really call a fighting game, really. Some people may disagree with that. It is what it is. But yeah, even though you compete in these games and that there is like levels to it and there's different varying levels of skills and different ways that you use the mechanics and everything, I just feel like the ceiling is different. The intention when they're being developed is different. The balance, the consistency, the functionality. There's just so many things that separate a game like Sparking Zero from, again, the more traditional mainstream fighting games. I just don't think that they're in the same lane. I don't think they occupy the same space. And I don't think Sparking Zero has to. For whatever reason, there are some people who like are really pushing it. And again, I kind of played on both sides, because on one hand, it's like the game is fine to just play casually, have fun, throw hands with the homies, do some cool Dragon Ball stuff. But then there's part of me as well who is, I would say, more in tune, or maybe leans more toward the more serious fighting games, that wants to see a bit more balance, or at least things to just be more consistent and more functional. But it's like, you know, you can't really have your cake and eat it too, and I understand that. And so like if I have to lean one way or the other, like I have my things that I prefer, but I also have an understanding of what is the most likely outcome, and I'm accepting of that. And I think the difference between myself and a lot of people I'm seeing on the internet is that they're not accepting of what it is. They have what they want, and they think that the game can be or should be that. Whereas for myself, I feel like I would like for the game to be this, but I understand. Because for example, case in point, right? I don't like super counter in the game, okay? We're gonna make a whole video talking about super counter at some point. I wish it wasn't in the game. Now I know, again, okay, because we about to get off topic for a little bit. Oh, but if they remove super counter, people just get hit in the back for free. It was never able to, if you buff revenge counter, make revenge counter works, that people, it works when people are behind you. I have, again, we don't talk about more in depth. It's not that I want people to just always be able to combo it no matter what, but I don't like super counter as a mechanic. In my ideal world, I would remove it from the game entirely and change the defensive mechanics in a way that, you know, it's to me would be better, but separate video. That being said, I understand that that's not something that they're going to do. That's me living in dreamland, okay? And I understand that super counter is going to exist, and I have to adapt to it as it is, maybe hope for some changes, but use it myself as well to my advantage and deal with it as it exists in the games. You know what I'm saying? There's a difference between like wanting to see a change and understanding or believing whether or not that change is actually going to happen. You feel me? Anyway, at the end of the day, I feel like Dragon Ball Sparking Zero by design lacks parity, it lacks balance, it's too inconsistent, there's bugs, there's glitches, and it was designed to be more casual than it was competitive by intention, or like intentionally. So I think that we're probably better off letting the game exist as its own thing, as opposed to trying to throw it in a room that it really doesn't belong in. Because honestly, from what we've seen so far, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero at the highest and like most optimal level that we've seen up to this point really isn't that interesting to watch either. It's kind of lacking in like flair and hype, because the ideal or optimal way to play the game is to be not as aggressive, rely a lot more on defense and everything like that. Kind of like everything that they didn't like about Tekken 7 and changed in Tekken 8 to make the game more aggressive, more engaging, and more offense focused. I think what I've seen so far from Sparking Zero can be a bit less interesting. We're seeing Android 19 and 20, Dr. Wheelo, Yajirobe. These aren't characters people enjoy watching or even really playing, but they enjoy winning, so they're doing it. But you know, I don't think it's really healthy for the community or for the game or for the competitive scene of it. And if this was a game that was at Evo, that's, y'all want to see, okay, let's say it's single battles. Y'all want to see 8 UI Gokus? Oh, but what about Leroy Japan? Yeah, that was an outlier that everyone clowns on Tekken for that happening, and they nerfed and fixed that shit immediately. I don't think they're going to nerf UI Goku to the ground in this game. It's not like Dragon Ball Fighters, right? Let's say you do DP battles. Okay, then you do like all these regen teams, Android 19, 20, Cell, Yajirobe, stall teams, where every single game is going to timeout. Oh, but you reduce the time. It's like, again, there you go. Create an external rule set. Okay, we're banning Yajirobe, even though he's getting tweaked or whatever, I guess, or banning these characters. There has to be this time limit, whatever. And it's just, you know what I mean? And like watching TNS, I saw a lot of people in the chat who were very bored, uninterested, not amused by what they were witnessing. And like there were some moments here or there that were pretty funny, but overall it was not a great event. There's a streamer slash YouTuber named Kuyon, Q-U-Y-O-N, who ran an event the next day or the day after. I believe it was the next day. He had a different rule set that was implemented that helped things run a lot smoother and made for a more interesting, fun, and exciting event. Rules that I came up with myself while I was watching TNS as to how I would run the event better. But still, even with that, it could be better. But again, at the end of the day, the game's not really designed for that. So there are certain limitations to what you can do even externally to help make things a better experience for both player and spectator. We even started having a conversation on stream where it's like, yeah, like we might not like Dragunov and Tekken, but watching Atif and Osan play against each other like in any top 8 or grand finals is going to be 11 times more interesting than watching Android 19 mirror matches or Yajirobe mirror matches. And that's pretty much where I stand. I think there's probably some other points I wanted to make or like counter arguments to myself that I probably meant to bring up and forgot. But I've been rambling on long enough. I have a lot to say on this topic, like a lot to say, but I think I've made my stance pretty clear. I don't think Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is a serious competitive fighting game. It's not meant to be, and I think that's okay. It's fun, it's casual, it's hype. I'm having a blast. Yes, I want to get better at the game, but I understand that, or at least I believe that the game has a certain ceiling to it, and not necessarily a ceiling in terms of how good players can get, but a certain level of jank and inconsistency that's going to prevent the game from going past a certain point. But again, this is mostly subjective. I would say, like, there is some fact or some like evidence to support some of this, but we can agree to disagree. But I would love to hear you guys' thoughts, your disagreements, your arguments in the comments down below. I got a lot of people asking me questions like, did I think like the JoJo's game was competitive? Did I think Storm 4 was competitive? And my answer to that is no, not in the way that we mean in the FGC. Because when people are trying to ask or say these games competitive, they're not talking about like, oh, we compete in these games and there's a rank mode and things like that. Because that's not what you mean. Because if that's what you mean, then like, yeah, we can objectively answer those questions. But y'all want to put the game in the same category as Tekken and Street Fighter, and it's not the same as Tekken and Street Fighter, and it's not close to those games, honestly, in that sense, in that context, in that nuance. So if that's the realm you're trying to put them in, then the answer is no. But can they be their own thing? Can they have their own scene? Can you run your own events with your own rules and things like that? Absolutely. We're already doing that. And it doesn't have to be anything more than that, or at least it doesn't have to be in the same lane as those other fighting games. Let Sparking Zero be its own thing, because that's what it wants to be. And again, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't want certain changes, or I'm not going to talk about certain things I do or don't like, or how I would tweak or fix certain things, because I am. I will. I do, right? But with a certain level of understanding. There are certain things that I think are also within the interest of fun, more so than the sake of competition, and there could be a balance of both. Again, how much they're actually going to tweak about this game in upcoming balance patches, updates, whatever, who really knows? I don't expect there to be major changes gameplay-wise or mechanic-wise to this game, but I'm kind of hoping for it. But I promise it's with good intentions. My heart's in the right place. I only have the game's best interest at heart. You feel me? But if things don't really change that much, then it is what it is. We either accept the game for what it is, or we move on. If you want something more competitive, or something that's going to be on the main stage at EVO, you might have to look in another direction. I think I've rambled on long enough. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Hit this video with a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you haven't already, so you can stay tuned for all the awesome content I'm bringing you. With all that being said, that's pretty much all I have today. And remember, nothing can happen until you swing the bat. Later.